Simply put, nobody selling anyone anything is saving the earth. That's just a fact, right? If you're saving the earth, you're not selling anything. A lot of them are looking for credible, sustainable practices because there's a lot of greenwashing, there's a lot of false advertising and messaging. So I think another thing that really helps us is to be extremely transparent. Show them the raw material, show them what you started from. And that transparency goes a long way because bigger companies are much more open to scrutiny. Something that has been working for us is doing a lot of founder-led content. I think customers are connecting with the philosophy behind it. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is going on in this person's brain? They want to feel a connection with people. So I'm also seeing scale in a different way. So I'm saying if I'm able to provide employment to these many people to create for large organizations, that to me is meaningful scale.
Hi, Malika. Thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Cancelled Plans?
Thank you so much, Chris, for having me. I'm super excited to have this conversation. A little bit about myself. I'm a failed architect. I studied to be an architect, but never ended up practicing. And I started my brand, Cancelled Plans, which is a design-based studio where we make products out of industrial waste. We collect waste from factory floors before it goes into the oceans and landfills, and even before it goes into the scrap yards and gets contaminated. And we use craft, which is very core to India, where we're from. And we use craft to upcycle these and make high value products. The idea was born that from scraps, usually things get downcycled. How can we make a luxury product using what is deemed waste or discarded? And if the nature of industrial processes, it's a large amount of waste that happens in manufacturing work with factories across pharmaceuticals. We work with a billboard printing factory. There's a lot of misprints. There's a lot of material that goes to waste. And then we use that to make art installation, furniture, clothes. The hypothesis here is the materials that we've discovered really lend themselves to a variety of things. So one can become a textile, one can become hardware, and then we use it as needed across categories.
So, from what I understand, Cancelled Plans recently pivoted. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I think I started this when I was, 26 or 27 years old, and very doe-eyed, very optimistic, and we created a lot of products. And I think it was a bunch of things that didn't necessarily work in our favor. We launched in December 2019. COVID hit us 2020. So I think the timing was one. We were probably ahead in terms of where the market was. And COVID hit. And I think at that point of time, I was also very young and eager for a win. So we did a lot of clothing, which, was an easy sale, try to get some brand built around that. Also I called the brand Cancelled Plans, and then suddenly it was a buzzword, right? Everyone's plans got cancelled. So we kind of took that opportunity and made some merch around it. So we also had to kind of adapt and be flexible. But when I really thought about it and looked at the business, I felt like the way to scale that would be through producing and manufacturing large scale of things, large volumes of things. And that didn't quite sit right with me because at the core philosophy, we are trying to say, don't consume as much. Invest and spend effort and time in things of value and fewer things of larger value rather than play the volume game. So I think for me at that point of time, and we made this pivot very intentionally so that we are not overproducing ourselves. We're not going to be hypocrites and say, hey, you shouldn't be consuming, but okay, we'll make so many. And in fashion is notorious, right, for having excess inventory and burning it and all of that. And that's a very real problem. So I wanted to be part of the solution and not a part of the problem. So it gave us a good opportunity to think differently. And I think that's something as a brand, I always wanted to stand for doing things differently. And then I think I found myself in order to chase that win and chase that commercial element, that we were veering away from the core and the philosophy of why it is that we started Cancel Plans to begin with. So that is broadly the reason for our pivot. Now, what we're doing is we're doing it with a lot more intentionality. We're doing projects for specific purposes. We are not producing in excess. We make very limited drops, limited collections, and some of them we only make one. So if it's gone, it's gone. And the way that we're looking at scale now is not through volume, but through maybe new geographies and new locations where there is already a sense of adoption for this. India still is a little bit to catch up. But Europe, for example, is very savvy. They're very educated about the environment, sustainable practices, materials, impact. So it's honestly an easier sell there. So we're looking to kind of expand and have a global footprint and be at the places where people want us to be rather than try to fit in a place that's not ready for us yet.
I think a lot of founders start their company with the intention of being one thing and then end up pivoting to something else. And then there's many cases where actually they don't pivot because they feel like they've got the right idea and it's the market who's wrong and the market just needs to catch up.
Speaking about the market, India is very price sensitive. And that's when it becomes difficult for a sustainable company. The other brands, also fashion brands, people find them to be overpriced over here. And again, it's all because of the nascency of the industry here. Because if more people are doing it, costs come down not automatically. There's more manufacturers, there's more resources, there's more everything. It's just that there's not as many people doing it right now, which is why it's expensive. So then I had to really ask myself this question in terms of like, what is it that I want to solve for? Do I want to solve for giving products to an Indian customer who is very price sensitive? Do I want to kind of explore and express my craft the way that I want to? Because at the end of it, I'm also a designer myself. I consider myself designer first and business owner second.
What's been the hardest part about turning creative prototypes into something scalable?
So I think the way that we look at scale has to change a little bit. So for example, we did do this innovation with pharmaceutical packaging material, and we made a textile which can then become become much more diverse in its usage. We're kind of starting with the material and we're innovating it such that it can become a textile, it can become something else. And then we find the people who are looking for these, and they are the partners who help us scale it up. So, for example, we had a project with a hotel, and hotels, especially, I think, are very particular about sustainability lately. And you see it the most, I think, in the bathroom, where they will tell you don't give the towel every day for wash if you don't have to. Don't leave the tap running. That kind of stuff. There's messaging around sustainability in the bathrooms, especially in hospitality. So we created a small toiletry kit made out of pre-loved saris, which is very Indian. It's something that people can carry and wear the brand with them proudly. And that is something that can be made at scale, right? We also work with NGO partners where upskilling is a big area of focus. And especially in India, a lot of women are trained and taught how to tailor to kind of make sure that they're in charge of their own livelihoods. And so we work with those kind of partners as well, where we can empower them. So today, maybe we're working with 20 women, maybe tomorrow that becomes 200. So I'm also seeing scale in a different way. So I'm saying if I'm able to provide employment to these many people to create for large organizations, that to me is meaningful scale.
So yeah, that's interesting to me then, because it's almost like you get to be as creative as you want to be as long as you're solving the issue.
Yeah.
And then it's the partners that introduce the scale.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, how is it that you get those partnerships right now? Are they reaching out to you or are you reaching out to them?
As of now, it has been them reaching out to us. We haven't been very proactive because I think also we are heads down experimenting and constantly trying to create new things. But I do wish to now start to reach out to people. I think for me also, this pivot gave me a lot of confidence until you make that decision. And to something that you were saying earlier, that founders often they are like, this is what has to happen, and then they stick to the plan. I'm happy to change, I'm happy to adapt. So oftentimes, like, this is one example of the hotel brand. We are also working with someone who's doing outdoor furniture, and a lot of our materials are waterproof. So then the project becomes about how can we create a solution for them, which we almost give them the recipe and they can then execute it at scale. And simply because, it doesn't we don't need to manufacture everything. We can make the prototype, we can give the experience, and we can say, hey, this is how you might be able to use this material, like almost like a patent, right? You give the steps on how to do it, like an IKEA instruction manual, and they can go and get it made for cheaper. I'm happy if that happens, because that means more for the cause, right? It means more people
Mm.
saving more trash. So we've been very open like that with partners. So I just try not to be too rigid about any one thing, and just kind of be open to different ways of working. A small portion of something can also give us scale, and it sometimes is as simple as like replacing a material. If I just say, hey, our material can perform XYZ, and it is also made from this, and it'll make you look good because you're doing something for the environment, most people bite. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess pricing is a difficult one because, especially in sustainability, as you said earlier, materials always cost so much more because it isn't being widely used right now. And the problem isn't just in India, it is still worldwide. When it comes to that pricing, sustainability can be very difficult, like mission driven work and creative work.
Yeah.
So, how have you approached pricing those B2B projects and what have you kind of learned through that process?
So I think what I learned importantly was, before doing any work, find out what the budget is. Because as a creative person, you're going for the moonshot. You're going for, I'm going to change this company and they're going to be insanely happy with what we create. I think that is ambitious and a little delusional. So I think it always helps to have an open and honest conversation saying, hey, we're happy to give you some impact and some value, but you need to give us an exact number or a ballpark at least, so that we can work accordingly. I think that has been something that's really helpful, because I mean, this is also from me learning when we've pitched like 5 ideas and they love the 5 ideas, and then we cost it, and then they're like, nah, I'm out. A few of these exercises kind of taught us that you give us the budgets first, you give us your ideas, what do you want to do, how do you want to do it, and then we'll figure out which material serves that purpose. For example, billboard waste is much cheaper, it's much more malleable, it's easy to embroider, tailor, stitch, all of that. So it's easy to play with that material. Whereas the pharmaceutical packaging goes through a much more rigorous, much more a handcrafted process. So that really gives us a idea of what their appetite is, and then we know how to stretch our creative muscles accordingly. So I feel that definitely helps with B2B. I think a lot of them are looking for credible sustainable practices, because there's a lot of greenwashing, there's a lot of false advertising and messaging. So I think another thing that really helps us is to be extremely transparent. Show them the raw material, show them what you started from. And that transparency goes a long way, because bigger companies are much more open to scrutiny. So we want to give them something that's an obvious one. We're not going to be subtle about it. We're not going to give you something and then you will have to spin a story around it in order to kind of explain it. It should be simple to explain. It should be something that has a direct impact. Like, you should be able to look at it and say, okay, I get it. So I think that kind of transparency also helps a lot with B2B people, and I love to play this little game. We make something and we're like, hey, guess what it is made out of? And people make their guesses. And if they're close to it, or if I say no, but it's actually this, and then there's a moment of delight or wow, that really also helps with the process, because then you are it's a quick win, right? You give them something that looks nothing like they've seen before, and you say, hey, I've made this entirely out of waste. Could you even tell? I think that moment of like surprise also goes in our favor. A little bit of theatrics and a little bit of that. But underneath that, there has to be transparency and honesty in terms of, this is the material we picked up and this is what we've made out of it. You can touch and feel it, and you can understand that it's truly sustainable without having to send it to a lab to test, for example.
So that's an interesting one to me, because then it's almost about how you're communicating the work that you do. So many sustainability companies struggle to tell a clear commercial story, especially because they often say like we're doing the right thing, but
Yeah.
often I find that companies are all about their bottom line. So how do you explain what Council Plans does now, especially to those companies that aren't engaged in sustainability?
So I had my own battle with this profitability versus passion. And I think the solution that I kind of figured out along the way, we've made another brand, which is called Malle, which is a much more affordable, accessible, scalable brand, which is also all made from natural materials. So there's one for the kitchen, one for the soul. And that in itself, I think, kind of gives people a little bit of comfort, because I think for me it's about the manifesting of all of this waste. Like, I have a target of like a ton of waste that I want to kind of reclaim and not go or whatever. So I think people see that the bottom line is not driving me necessarily, which kind of makes the sale a little easier, because I have nothing really to gain from it other than the satisfaction of making something I love. So I think that kind of gets people excited. And also from the it's kind of like some kind of reverse psychology in play, right? Where it's like, we're not doing this for the money, but that is attracting money to come to us. So it's adding to our credibility, it's adding to our little bit purest kind of thinking, where we are also creatively working out the financials, so that it's not a problem for the client when it's B2B specifically, and customers can interact with us as well.
So you've mentioned before that you don't want to lead with like we're saving the planet in your messaging.
Yeah,
Can you talk me a little bit through that thought process?
sure. So I'm going to be very honest, and this might be a little bit of a defeatist attitude, but I feel like as the planet, we are a bit far gone. Simply put, nobody selling anyone anything is saving the earth. That's just a fact, right? If you're saving the earth, you're not selling anything. That's kind of the core thinking. That's why also we never used it as a messaging or communication that we're doing good, because ultimately it has to be desirable, right? It has to have it has to solve a problem. It has to be desirable. There has to be reason for it to exist in the world. And doing good can't be it because because I think that's a personal choice. You can choose to be good, you can choose to live. I think I want to create a community that's not judgmental of people's choices. See, also the thing is, I believe that this kind of change has to happen on a policy level. Governments have to do it, because if you put the onus on a consumer, you're competing with not other brands, you're competing with the convenience of other brands. So if you're doing something sustainable, it has to be the same experience that people are getting when they're doing a fast fashion buy. Like, you should be able to deliver it in 2 days, like everyone else promised. That's what you're competing with, right? So you have to build a good product, whether it does good or not. Because people make that first purchase maybe because they want a little bit of a pat on the back from themselves, saying that, hey, I did something good. But is buying a t-shirt really doing something good? I don't know. I don't believe that it is.
So you just mentioned there that I guess the responsibility is on governments to legislate it, not on consumers. And then at the same time, you're running a business that's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So in that case, do you feel like, because businesses can change the way that they run their processes, the way that they do things. Obviously, you run a business trying to do this stuff.
Yeah.
Does that not mean that you believe business is the right way to move this forward?
Definitely, because see, I think also I'm a driven individual who's also has personal ambition for myself, and that is going to come through business. I think also impact is created through business, where people, even if it's awareness or if it's kind of an interaction or access or something like that, or message becomes clearer through that. I think it's almost, the business is the shape that my purpose has taken, to be honest. And there is validation for that as well. And like I say also, like, I'm an artist, I'm a designer first, and my medium is sustainability. My medium is that. So just like an artist picks oil paints or acrylic, I've picked waste materials. It's a simplified way for me because being a business owner comes with a lot of stress and pressure. And like I said earlier, the onus cannot be on business owners and consumers alone. I mean, while I feel like the government also has a to do this on a policy level, it has to kind of be a collective action from consumers, from business owners, and policy, right? Because again, being a startup founder is immensely stressful. And so just being able to make money is one thing. And then the add on pressure of like doing the right thing, and then the add-on pressure of like cutting costs to ensure that it's a vicious cycle and it's hard, and I'm still trying to navigate it. I don't know if I've figured it out just yet, and I think that's gonna be a push and pull for a while. But again, as an artist, I thrive on that push and pull as well, right? Like we like to kind of beat ourselves up every now and then, at the same time do something that inspires us. So I think business is that ex-boyfriend that's giving me the the glooms.
You've made this pivot now. From a marketing standpoint, what's working quite well to bring in opportunities at the moment?
Honestly, I think something that has been working for us is doing a lot of founder-led content. I think customers are connecting with the philosophy behind it. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is going on in this person's brain? They want to feel a connection with people. I think broadly, this is a theme where we're in a world that's hyper connected but also very isolating. So I think people want more connection. That's definitely helping kind of me putting myself out there and talking about the products and the process. I think the process as well is something that people are hugely interested in. I think especially now with AI coming in and you know what is a real image and what is a fake image, people are really appreciating raw, messy, behind the scenes. I think everyone was scared that it'll replace our jobs, but if anything, it's wanting people to interact with us more because now they want something tangible and real. They like a lot of people want to know that it's not AI. So I think the adoption has been a little bit different from what was predicted. Being again very intentional in terms of not bombarding people's feeds with constant clickbait things and things like that. I think that has given us also a sense of authenticity and credibility where we are kind of like, hey, I'm not fighting for your attention. This is what I'm doing. If you like it, come join us. So I think that kind of is inviting a lot of people in rather than kind of adding to the noise that's already there. That's been helpful as well. Other than that, I think for us, we were predominantly doing digital marketing and online marketing in the last few years, but now we are also pivoting to do more physical offline kind of experiences because I think a lot of our stuff is meant to be touched and felt and experienced, and experiential design is also a part of what we do. So a lot of people will be excited by the fact that we're doing good, and that's good. I don't want to ever deny that. And then a lot of people who had no idea about it or didn't even think about it have that moment of, oh, this is something that's happening in the world. And both are great reactions for us.
What hasn't worked when it comes to marketing? What have you tried that just failed spectacularly?
Performance marketing, I think it did fail spectacularly, not because performance marketing as a function is bad. I think you can do huge things from it, but I think it's one of those things that unless you have a very, very, very specific strategy about who you're targeting and who you're finding, it kind of is easy to burn up the money and like dry up really fast without seeing sales. While you might gain a certain number of followers on your socials or you have engagement on your Instagram, these people might not be your customers. So I think the learning there was you need to find your customer and then chase them rather than, and especially in a country like India, right? For example, I have shown my products to say 10,000 people, but they still might be the wrong 10,000 people. Not one of them may be the right. And the odds are like that in our country. So, like 1% of our country is probably like 20 million people. And that 1% could be entirely the wrong target group. So that kind of experimentation, I think, were a lot of sinking of money. Your cost of customer acquisition was insanely high, but I think I'm also a little bit more educated in it now. We had to go through that to learn.
The performance marketing is an interesting one because it comes down to that buyer's pyramid. Only
Exactly.
3% of people in the market are ready to buy at the moment. Performance marketing only works for that 3% of people.
Like the same thing, we're shifting from a volume to value based
Mhm.
model, but performance marketing largely is a volume based funnel.
Unless you use it to educate people and kind of bring them to becoming more aware of their issues. So, like moving them from pain aware to problem aware, solution aware, whatever it might be. But then you're spending money almost on brand awareness rather than bringing in income. So,
Exactly.
again, it feels like you're throwing money away. So, it's very difficult. Performance marketing is very difficult nowadays.
And it took for us also to go through this to even say, okay, who is our audience, right? That's something that took us a while to figure out because we work across price points, we work across materials, work across categories. It becomes a bit tricky to identify a customer. I still might not be like, I might have a few personas that I might say these are my target customers. So people's tastes are evolving. There's so many options to choose from, and everything's at your fingertips. So I think that just gets challenging from a digital marketing point of view.
How did you do that work finding that target persona then? Because I find that a lot of companies that I speak to are trying to sell to the entire market and sell to lots of different personas. But I find the ones that grow the quickest are the ones that almost build that beachhead market, where it's these are our ideal customers because we make the most impact or they're the most profitable or something like that. And I so highly encourage people to start doing that and really focusing in on one, maybe two types of customer. So how did you do that work? What advice do you have for the people on that?
So I think it has come from a lot of experimentation. Like I said, we were priced a bit higher, so we did merch. A lot of people bought the merch, but I think ultimately it all comes down to that question of like why you're doing what you're doing, right? And that work is something that you need to ask yourself every day, every week, whatever cadence you choose. You need to understand why you're doing what you're doing, and then the next question is who is this for? I look for projects that are innovative. We want to do things differently. We want value over volume. So these are kind of broad guiding check boxes for me. And so honestly seeing that, I kind of got a little bit of, if I find a way to get to these customers who really are patrons rather than people who are just browsing and then clicking on something, that is a value play for me. So if I sell one piece that's worth 700 t-shirts, for example, that is an element of success because then we get to spend time on innovating and making a product that's innovative, creatively expressive. So I think finding that community was important for me because even it's essentially someone who appreciates the work that we put in and sees the value that happens. And then also what happens is when this segment of people, I'm talking about the art community specifically, this segment of people kind of become in their own right influencers of what other people are buying. There is so much beauty in it, and craft by itself now has become so rare that it does have value just because it was made by, for example, one of the techniques that we're using for an upcoming project. So I think a lot of people who are actually knowledgeable about this stuff, like I love to search for the nerds because they are the people who even save up and spend on one piece and then kind of admire it versus the people who are uh just moving on to the next thing. So I think that has been the intent and intention where we have kind of identified these personas, design stores, museums, those are kind of places where people spend time in appreciating things. And art also always, like, since the beginning of time or whatever, it was not meant for commerce. It had patrons, there were kings, and there was people who kind of spent money to just promote the arts. Those people are still around and they have big pockets.
The final question for you is if another founder came to you tomorrow and said, we want to turn our sustainability project into a real business, what is one thing you tell them not to underestimate?
I think don't underestimate the power of consistency. And this comes from someone who's pivoted a few times, right? I'm coming back to the core of the idea. I tried stuff. I think in this world, it's super, super easy to get distracted. I think originality and consistency goes a really long way. And while you might not see instant growth, you will stand for something in the world. And whenever you stand for something, the money will come. It just automatically will come. There is an audience for everyone. And if you're not consistently doing it for a period of time, you're not going to find that audience. If you are getting into business and you don't know how to listen to your instinct, don't do it, because you have to make so many decisions. Your gut is going to tell you 1,000 things. So I think the first thing you should know is to like be in tune with your gut. And 100 people say 100 different things, and there's 100 different right ways to do things. So I think if you know how to listen to your gut and kind of connect with that and have instinct for making decisions, because as a founder, whatever decision you make has to be the right decision, right? Because that moves you forward. So you should be able to take ownership of that.
Thank you very much for your time, Malika. How can people learn more about Cancelled Plans, perhaps work with you?
You can write to me at my email that I'm happy to share on this podcast, which is mallika@cancelplans.com. I'm constantly receiving ideas. You can even DM me on Instagram. I'm at Malika Reddy G. Our website is a great place to connect with us. Search for us online. If you're in India, if you're in Hyderabad, come visit us at our studio. We're always looking for new ideas. I think I might have 5 ideas with the waste I have, but the more people we bring in, the more ideas we have, the more ways we figure out how do we scale. Like I said, we scale through people. So please, everyone is welcome to reach out to me, and we'll see what we can do.
Malika, really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chris. This was lovely.